Welcome to a deep dive that takes us way, way back. We're about to uncover the fascinating journey from those early hunter-gatherer groups to the very first farmers.
The huge shift, right?
Huge. And our guide for this incredible trip through time. An excerpt from a textbook that really lays the groundwork for understanding this transformation.
And a period covering an immense stretch of human history. We're talking 2 million years, focusing on the Indian subcontinent. The scale of time is mind-boggling. So much to uncover.
It's like stepping into a totally different world, just trying to wrap my head around it.
You know, we often think about stone tools as our main source of info about these early humans, which is true. The textbook's right to emphasize that. Those tools are like the ultimate survivors, giving us that tangible link. But what gets me is how they reflect an understanding of the environment. That connection to nature had to shape every aspect of their lives.
It's not just knowing how to make a tool, it's knowing what to use it on, right? The textbook mentioned this too, being in sync with nature's rhythms.
Exactly. Take the Narmada Valley. It's highlighted on the map for a reason. The textbook suggests it was a real hub of activity. Imagine that river, the Narmada, its flow changing with the seasons, drawing animals to it, and those early humans following right along.
Because they had to. Those animal migrations must have dictated so much of their movement. No popping down to the supermarket back then.
Exactly. We often use the term nomadic, but their movements weren't just random wanderings. Picture tracking, herds of antelope or deer across huge distances, those migrations driven by the rain, the seasons, where the best grazing land was.
Talk about being resourceful and adaptable. They had to be keenly aware of their surroundings.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just about animal movements either. Knowing where to find edible plants, when those plants would be in season, even reading the signs of a coming storm. These were skills passed down over generations, vital for their survival.
And this is just 2 million years ago. It feels like we're barely scratching the surface.
Oh, we are. And it gets even more intriguing as we dig into their culture, art, rituals, but we'll get to that.
Okay, now you've got me on the edge of my seat. But before we go further, gotta ask about those stone tools. Fascinating, but just one piece of the puzzle, right?
You're right. It's just the tip of the iceberg. And what's amazing is they left us more than tools and campsites. These early humans, they left traces of their creativity, of what they believed, etched onto cave walls. You're talking about cave paintings, right?
The textbook had some incredible examples, yeah.
Yep.
Found in Madhya Pradesh and southern Uttar Pradesh.
Exactly. And we're not talking about some quickly drawn images here. These were deliberate works of art. The textbook really emphasized the skill involved, especially when they were depicting animals.
It's one thing to picture these early humans hunting, but to then imagine them capturing those experiences, that movement, those details, it brings a whole other dimension to their world.
It gives us a glimpse into how they saw the world around them, right? Animals weren't just a food source. They must have held some deeper significance, too. We're talking about a time when humans lived so close to nature, their lives so intertwined with it.
It makes you appreciate those cave paintings in a whole new way. Not just art, but a record of their lives, beliefs, their connection to everything around them. Speaking of connections, the textbook also talks about fire, didn't it? Another huge part of their lives.
Absolutely. Finding evidence of fire, like what they uncovered in the Kernel Caves, remember that's marked on the map? That was a game changer. Warmth, light, being able to cook food, but it goes beyond the practical stuff, too.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Break it down for me. What made fire so important?
Think about the social side of it. Fire creates a natural gathering place, right? Imagine families, groups huddled around those flames, sharing stories, knowledge passed down over generations. That warmth probably brought a sense of community, that shared experience that strengthens bonds.
It's amazing how something so basic could have such a huge impact, not just about survival, but connection even.
Exactly. But fire wasn't the only thing shaking things up during this period. The textbook points to another massive factor, setting the stage for a monumental change, a change in the Earth's climate itself.
You're talking about that period of intense climate change around 12,000 years ago, right? The one that led to all those grasslands spreading out.
That's it. Temperatures rose, and those grasslands became like a paradise for grazing animals, herds of deer, antelope, even wild cattle. This abundance of prey, that would have been huge for those hunter-gatherer groups, a readily available food source. But it also laid the foundation for something totally revolutionary, the very beginnings of agriculture.
All right, now you've got my full attention. How did those vast grasslands lead to humans going from hunting and gathering to actually planting crops? It seems like such a massive jump.
It was a process, for sure. And the textbook makes it clear that this wasn't an overnight thing. Remember, many of the grains we still rely on today, wheat, barley, rice, those grew wild in that region back then. As those hunter-gatherer groups followed the herds across these fertile lands, they'd encounter these wild grains, observe their cycles, and somewhere along the way they start to see their potential.
Like all the pieces falling into place, that knowledge of the land, the climate shifting, this abundance of grains, makes you wonder if they just sort of stumbled onto agriculture by chance.
It's definitely possible. What we do know is this transition from hunting to actually cultivating crops, what we call domestication, it was gradual. Probably happened in different areas at different times, with groups experimenting, adapting to this new way of living.
So not like a light switch flipped, they all became farmers. It was more subtle.
Exactly. And as we go deeper into this textbook, we'll see more evidence of that transition. The rise of the first settlements, new technologies popping up, more complex social structures developing.
You've definitely got me wanting to learn more. But before we jump too far ahead, something in the textbook really caught my eye. Mergar. This place, marked on our map here, is described as one of the very first villages we know of, going back an incredible 8,000 years. What makes Mergar so important?
Mergar, it's hard to even fathom that kind of time depth, 8,000 years. The textbook mentions something about animal bones being a key find there.
Yeah, the timeline is something else. And those bones, that's where it gets really interesting. They found both wild animal remains, A and D, those of domesticated animals at Mergar. Think about what that tells us about this whole village life emerging.
It's not just about hunting out of necessity anymore, is it? They're starting to live alongside these animals, maybe even controlling their breeding. Exactly. That's the big shift. The textbook makes a point of this blend of old and new. Still hunting, holding on to that ancient link, but also experimenting with this more predictable food source domesticated animals. It's like a snapshot of a society in transition.
And one that's settling down. The textbook described houses in Mergar, some with multiple rooms, even storage rooms. That's a big deal, right?
Huge. Storage changes everything. Think about it, hunter-gatherers. They lived with a certain level of, well, uncertainty about food. But storage means surplus. It means stability, being able to plan ahead. It's a sign they were putting down roots, literally investing in a different kind of life.
Makes sense. If you're growing crops, raising animals, you need a way to keep it all safe, make it last. But here's where I got really curious. The textbook mentioned burials at Mergar. Some of them had goats laid to rest alongside the humans. What's the story there?
It's something else, isn't it? And it hints at something deeper than just the practical stuff, the food and shelter. Those burials, they point to a belief system, a developing spirituality, maybe even an understanding of what happens after death. It really makes you think about what those early villagers were discussing, what they believed about life and death.
To get even a glimpse of that from thousands of years ago, incredible. We started off imagining life constantly on the move, those hunter-gatherers. And now here we are in Mergar, the beginnings of villages, agriculture, even those early spiritual ideas.
It really shows you the scale of this transformation. And even though we're reaching the end of this textbook excerpt, we've just scratched the surface. So much more out there waiting to be discovered.
A journey that never really ends, right?
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, got any final thoughts for our listeners? Something to chew on as they keep exploring this incredible period.
I do. Think back to those burials in Mergar, the goats laid to rest with their humans. Imagine those goats as a symbol of this pivotal moment, a time when our whole relationship with nature was transforming. What did we lose, and what did we gain as we shifted from those nomadic hunter-gatherers to becoming the very first villagers, farmers? A question worth pondering.